Your brain has this incredible ability to rapidly change itself when it's given real-time instant information, far beyond what most people could imagine changing. If I am training somebody who's in a not good mood, I put a sensor over the left frontal quadrant of their brain. I'm going to train them to increase the activity in that part of their brain, which just plays a role in more up mood. And in 5 minutes, they feel better. What's going on? Most people have no clue they can do that.
Michael Cohen is one of the world's leading experts in neurofeedback, the science of training circuits in your brain to function more efficiently, with real-world applications from mental health and elite performance to ADHD and autism symptom management. For over 20 years, he's trained thousands of professionals through his Center for Brain Training, while pushing the boundaries of how real-time feedback can reshape the mind. But does it really work? What does the evidence actually say? Subscribe if you want your left frontal lobe to stop being such a downer.
We're near PGA National, and there's some golfers that on occasion I get. And I had a guy who came, he was trying to get on the major circuits, and when he came, he was probably 23. And he's like, I have an incredible game, but my head gets in my way. We did 2 sessions on him. And it was very clear that he did not realize how he ramped up. He got over-engaged. So if you think about golf, you got to be really calm when you're going to hit a shot. And if something happens and you hit a bad shot, can you get that out of your head? So we put sensors on him. I didn't do a brain map. I just kind of showed him how his nervous system was overly ramping, and he got it really quick. Athletes get stuff quickly. We did 2 sessions. He calls me. He'd never won a tournament. He texts me actually from Brazil. He says, I just won my first tournament. That was after 2 sessions of neurofeedback.
Michael Cohen, what is neurofeedback training and why should the listener care?
So neurofeedback is fundamentally a gem for your brain. So it is a way to say, okay, my brain, I'm struggling with anxiety. I'm struggling with sleep. I'd like to be sharper. My short-term memory is not as good as it could be. I tend to get anxious. I tend to get stuck in my head and I can't quiet my mind. I mean, people have all kinds of different issues, that they deal with. And so there are many ways that people deal with that, from exercise to yoga to drugs and medications to many other factors. But what if you could just go to the gym and I can't quiet my mind, particularly if I go to sleep and my mind is going and it takes me an hour to get to sleep. Is that a good thing? Actually, no. And, we can do meditation, we can do all these things, but literally you can train the circuits of your brain that are supposed to quiet your mind. I'm just picking that example. How do I strengthen those circuits so that my brain quiets itself without me having to work so darn hard to quiet my mind? If I tend to get triggered because people say things to me that greatly upset me or bother me, or I shut down because I'm sensitive, we can do lots of psychotherapy. We can do many things to calm our nervous system. We can do vagus nerve stimulation. But if you can exercise the circuits of your brain that help you be more calm, less triggered, more emotionally resilient, meaning you say something to me and I go, I don't care, instead of blowing up or shutting down or something like that. And I'm picking those examples, but what if I just have a hard time falling asleep? How does your brain sleep? That's a brain thing. Your brain is supposed to go from alert and awake. You're in an alert and awake state, you look to be, to closing your eyes and relaxing. That's an alpha state, by the way. Maybe people have heard alpha is more relaxed and calm. When you close your eyes, your brain automatically is supposed to start making alpha waves, which is a quiet, I don't care as much place. And then I'm going to drift into almost asleep, semi-asleep. That's called theta. That's also a creative place. But it is when you're closing your eyes, you're on your way to sleep, and I'm closing my eyes and I'm drifting, but I wasn't quite asleep. I was almost asleep, but not quite. That's that twilight place. That's theta. And then delta, which is what people want for deep sleep. But that's a brain architecture thing. Your brain is supposed to go from fully alert and awake to gradually getting into sleep. And if you have a hard time with any of those transitions, you're trying hard. So you're taking supplements, you're taking pills, you're doing yoga, you're exercising intensely so I can quiet my mind. There's many, many, many things people do. But what if you can just target using technology to actually measure your brain activity and train yourself to be calmer or to transition into sleep in a more efficient, effective way? That's what neurofeedback technology allows you to do. It allows you to exercise the heck out of your brain.
Very nice. Well said. And we're going to get into all of the intricacies and details of how to train different aspects of your brain, because you mentioned lots of different things there. We're going to get into all of them. But first, I'm really curious about why you care so much about this. What's your story or your inflection point in your life that's caused you to care so much about neurofeedback?
So my dad in 1994 had what would have been called a mental breakdown. So he was 77, he had retired. He had had some issues in the past. So he had had a couple of bad episodes where he got into extreme depression and he was seeing doctors, and then he actually had shock therapy earlier in his life, but it brought him out of it. And for 10 years, he was fine. And there were 2 episodes, and then 15 years, he was fine. But when he retired, he crashed. And at that point, he was seeing the head psychiatrist at Vanderbilt Medical School in Tennessee, and nothing worked. So nothing worked. Drugs did not work. Shock therapy did not work. They were like, well, he may just have to be institutionalized. I mean, there's not much you can do. So I am fundamentally a researcher, and I researched at the time. It was hard to find things. It was kind of early internet, so there wasn't much there. So I went to Emory Medical School Library. I was in Atlanta and spent tons of time, heard about this from actually a psychiatrist who said, oh, you might want to check this thing out called neurofeedback. I'm like, what is that? And once I learned enough about it, once I called several psychologists and doctors around the country who had published research papers, and I got them on the phone, and I'm like, does this thing really help you change your brain when you have someone like my dad who was just obsessing over and over and over 14 hours a day of just constant, I can't shut off my brain. I'm worried about this. I can't do anything. You couldn't even have a conversation with him. He couldn't read a book.
Wow.
He couldn't watch TV. He just obsessed all day. And so you got to do something, right? And I just kept researching, found out about neurofeedback, finally convinced after I did a bunch of research, my mom to bring him the closest place 6 hours away to help try it for 10 days. And I go up there on the 6th day. It was 2 hours north of Atlanta. That was the closest place I could find at the time. And I go up there and walk into the office where he's training twice a day. And he turns around and he's there sitting, and he turns around and says, oh, Mike, how you doing? How's it going? And it was like, okay, that's different. He was not having conversations like that with me. He just obsessed about all this stuff. So it was shocking. It was shocking. How did he change that much? Now, 10 days wasn't enough to completely get him out of that, but it moved the needle enough that other things started to work also. And I'm like, why has everybody not heard of this? Why have I never heard of this? And so I actually started helping the guy that was up there. We held a meeting at Clemson University. He was up near that area in South Carolina. I'm like, I'm going to help him promote this. I'm going to get him on the radio and stuff like that. So we did a talk at Clemson with a psychiatrist and this guy, and 125 people showed up because it was about what can you do other than medications. That was the name of the talk for your brain. What can you do other than medications to help your brain? Turns out lots of people got problems. And lots of people realize that medications are kind of band-aids, but they don't really solve the long-term solution. And the number of people who need this is amazing. So I essentially decided to quit high tech. I had been in high tech for almost 20 years. And I'm like, I'm going to help this guy. We're going to open a center in Atlanta, which he wanted to do. And we went from there, which was a crazy thing to do. I mean, there's a lot more money in high tech than in this, but it was just, wow, why aren't people having access to this? And I've never looked back.
Wow.
It's just something that everyone, once they learn enough about just how powerful a tool it is. I mean, let's say you want to focus better because even though you're sitting here talking to me, you're actually thinking about 14 things right now while we're talking. I'm sure that's not true.
Only about 10 things, but it's a thing everyone can improve. You know, one of my main skills is being able to sit there and listen to someone on a highly complicated topic for lots of time on a Zoom screen as well. You can fade off. So everyone wants to improve their focus. Of course, that's something everyone wants to improve over time.
So you actually hit on something that really is maybe a better definition of neurofeedback. We all want to improve. We all want to improve our brain. And how much does our brain play a role in how we function in the world? I'd say a lot.
Yes.
So neurofeedback is performance training. I mean, we don't always call it that, but what we're doing when you're training, and people may go, what the heck is he talking about with neurofeedback? So just imagine that you're putting sensors over your prefrontal lobe. Okay, your prefrontal lobe plays a role in how you engage in attention. It's part of your attentional system. So right now, as you're paying attention to me, you are recruiting more neurons to fire 12 to 20 times per second over your left and right prefrontal lobe. Can you feel the neurons pooling there so that you can stay on attention? You probably don't. Most people don't. But that's if you measured the brain and you were being efficient at staying engaged, your brain would automatically increase what is called beta, which is an external locus of attention, meaning I am putting my attention externally instead of staying in my head. And you do have to balance when you're doing an interview, how much in your head and how much external. But if you're too in your head, you miss.
Absolutely.
If you have a job, if you have a relationship, and you're too in your head, you are not performing to that situation as well as you should. How do you train that to do better? So there are many different ways, from meditation to exercise. People do lots of things to help this. But what if I can just put a sensor on your brain, tell you every time your brain is being more present and more engaged with external attention? Because, for example, that would be what I would train if I'm training here. I mean, there's different parts of your brain. You're not always training attention. You could be training being more calm, being less thinking in my brain. But there's different ways to train, but all of them I'm going to measure different circuits. I'm going to measure a circuit right here, and I'm going to give you instant feedback through a computer screen. Okay, you're paying attention? You're not. You're paying attention? You're not. And if you practice being told, okay, I'm paying attention now, you get better at paying attention and being more present.
Yeah. Makes sense. Something that always strikes me when I talk to neuroscientists is just how staggeringly complex the brain really is. It's this incredible prediction engine, always trying to make sense of the world and keep us safe. But it's important to remember we're still running ape hardware. Our brains weren't even remotely built for the chaos of modern life. And sometimes they just get scrambled. I've recently had some difficulty in my own personal life, and I realized that it was about time my own ape prediction system got the gym workout and just rebalancing that it's probably needed for quite a long time. So I booked my first therapy session with BetterHelp, who I'm incredibly excited to be partnering with on this video. A massive umbrella review of hundreds of randomized control trials found that nearly every meta-analysis of psychotherapy favored it over control conditions. In other words, mental health professionals from decades of research consistently find that talking therapies do actually work. BetterHelp is an entirely online therapy platform designed to make that process incredibly simple. You can connect with a licensed therapist from your home on your schedule through video, audio, or even text with literally no fuss at all. What I like about it is that you can switch therapists at any time until you find someone who you personally can build rapport with and open up to, which is such a critical part of therapy, at no extra cost. If you've ever thought about trying therapy, or you're just feeling a little bit stuck in your own head lately like I was, this might be a great first step that I really couldn't recommend more. Visit betterhelp.com/giantshoulder to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp/giantshoulder, and in doing so, you also support the channel. Links are down below, because sometimes the most powerful way to understand your own brain is just to talk about it. I've been a tennis coach for the last 11 years, so I think I can relate to the example of just basically standing a meter away from someone and saying, that was a good forehand, that was a bad backhand, you need to follow through your stroke a lot more. So it's just providing that feedback as quickly as possible to when the event happens that the brain is able to learn. In the case of tennis, the person is like consciously taking in the information and then trying to see me do the stroke, and then is consciously trying to rework that stroke. What are the neurons doing? You know, if I'm trying to focus and you tell me I was focusing there, but I wasn't focusing in that moment, since it's not as elaborate as changing my forehand in tennis, like how am I, you know what I mean? How is that reinforcement loop occurring exactly in neural circuits in the brain when I can't just tell them to concentrate in that moment?
By the way, great question. Nobody's ever asked that question to me in that way before. So very interesting. Maybe it is more elaborate, by the way. So elaborate meaning when you're coaching someone, you are giving them feedback, but it's a delayed feedback and they're having to adjust. Okay, here's what that means. What if the moment they were playing tennis and they moved their arm slightly in a different wrong way, or they're not paying attention quite in the same way, you gave them instant feedback as the moment they start getting off, you would actually do a much better job of training them, because you can't give them that level of instant feedback. When we are training a brain circuit, you are giving in real time, okay, your brain's in the optimum engaged state. I don't know if it's optimum, but in a better state of engagement, or you're not. And think of it more like video games. You've ever played a video game?
Never in my life. No,
Okay.
Of course I have, yes. A couple of times.
So have you ever started playing a video game and you had absolutely no idea how to play?
Of course.
Actually, that's how everybody starts, right? You have no idea. You start playing. So how do you figure out how to get better? So if you think about that, your brain is trying to identify patterns, and a pattern that is more productive at achieving the outcome of the game, whatever that outcome happens to be. And you have no idea what pattern you're trying to figure out, but your brain is figuring out the patterns and how to do better, correct?
Yes.
And so how does it do that? Your brain is a pattern recognition machine. That's what it does for a living. And we're measuring the pattern that your brain is making. And the moment that pattern is less optimum, the feedback, so let's say you're watching a movie, the movie fades out, the movie gets smaller. You instantly, your brain says, oh, I'm off. And it has to find the right way. Just like on the video game, when you screw up, you click, oh, that was wrong. I didn't get points. Now I need to worry about getting points. But how did you figure it out? How did you figure out that you were off and you need to do better? You don't know. Your brain is doing it for you. It's automatically adapting. Your brain is automatically adapting to the instant feedback But instead of playing better on a little computer game, you're literally improving how your brain circuit is firing efficiently.
Yeah, makes sense. And the video game example, I think, makes a lot of sense. Let's go back to your father when he was initially doing that training. Let's talk about how this neurofeedback training works in the context of depression. And I'd be really interested to contrast it between 1995 and 2025 and just see what's changed in 30 years.
So in many respects, a lot has changed, and in many respects, a lot has not changed. So, I apologize that I'm never going to give you a completely straight answer.
I'm used to it on a podcast like this. Trust me, I'm used to it.
The brain is incredibly complex. So
Yes.
we know far more about how the brain functions now than we did 30 years ago. And so we have more clues about what circuits we might train or how we might approach it. But at the time, we were targeting two spots on the brain that play a role in how you regulate what is called arousal. So arousal is how alert and awake am I? How able am I to maintain a certain level of alertness to listen? Like if you were tired and you were a little draggy and your arousal was a little low, and you halfway through this said, what did he just say again? Because you're not maintaining as much alertness as you might be. Or conversely, you're a little wound up and you're having a hard time staying sitting without a little shaking there and feeling a little antsy. That's the arousal being too high. So if your arousal needs to be within a certain level. This was called kind of arousal training, that if I help you balance being more calm, not too jacked up, not too low, and I'm exercising circuits that frankly affect other parts of the brain. You can't train any spot of the brain without it actually having some impact on other parts of the brain. So at the time, back 30 years ago, we trained a few key spots. So for example, these spots across what is called the sensory motor strip that play a role in how the brain, there's something called thalamocortical regulation. This is actually more in research now than it was back then, which is how your brain manages itself. So it's how deeper parts of your brain talk to the cortex, meaning you got to have good timing in your brain. Your brain has to be able to manage information that's coming at it, manage thought processes, manage your ability to do attention. And there's circuits that control the conversation between the top of your brain, which is called the cortex, and deeper structures of your brain. So literally what you're training anytime you're doing neurofeedback is better timing between this part of your brain and deeper structures. And we were able to do that then. We are still able to do that now, but we have fancier equipment, better games, more knowledge about what circuits to train. We can train potentially more different areas at the same time instead of one spot or, one spot at a time. Are those always better than we even did 30 years ago? Not always. In other words, basic exercise can be quite good, but we have more sophisticated understanding of the brain. And so we think of ourselves as being better able to target, let's say you think too much. Your brain races at times. You can't shut it off. I know very few people have that problem, right?
Exactly. Yeah, definitely relate with that.
I ask lots of people, are you able to just sit quietly and not think and just be? Very few people that I see answer yes to that. Now, obviously you can meditate, but that's an area of the brain that often is called that's called the anterior cingulate. The anterior cingulate plays a role in part of the brakes of the brain, a bit of how I manage my attention when I get stuck in thoughts. It can be an overactive or underactive anterior cingulate. That's this area right in here. I shaved my head just for this.
Just for this podcast, I really appreciate it. It's given an amazing descriptive example.
So we know a lot more about the anterior cingulate, and if you train that, that plays a role in how I shift my attention. So if I get stuck on something, the anterior cingulate plays a role to manage my attention. It plays a role also in mood. It's not the only part of the brain that plays a role in that, but it is a control mechanism. So are there more ways for us to think about training that and equipment that is easier to do that with, that has an easier learning curve for clinicians or even people who may try to do some of this at home, hopefully under supervision, because usually if you're trying to train the brain for certain goals, you actually have to know what is the best way to train your brain. And often people who are putting things on their head, if you don't know what you're doing, you don't make as much progress. So, the biggest challenge that neurofeedback has had over the years, why is this not more well known? I mean, doesn't it make sense to train your brain to function, to perform better? Whether that's for mood, whether that's because I want to do a better job at my job, whether that's I want to do better at school, or I want to sleep better. I mean, any of these are really performance questions, right? How well is my brain performing? And neurofeedback, your brain has this incredible ability to rapidly change itself when it's given real-time instant information, far beyond what most people could imagine changing. I mean, if I am training somebody who's in a not good mood, shitty mood, and I put a sensor over the left frontal quadrant of their brain, and I say, okay, I'm going to train them to increase the activity in that part of their brain, which just plays a role in more up mood. And in 5 minutes, they feel better. Do people expect, oh no, I have to take medications? No, there's something, I'm worried about real things. You can't just change my brain. I'm really worried about real things. You can't just do that. And yet we put sensors on the anterior cingulate. We put sensors on particular area. We train. And at times in 2 to 5 minutes, people are shifting what's going on. Most people have no clue they can do that.
Can you talk exactly about how you would do that? If I was going into your clinic, I was having some symptoms of depression, anxiety, how exactly would we work together in that session using neurofeedback to have those results within 2 to 5 minutes? I'm curious to walk through that.
So I'm going to give 3 levels of answers to this question. Okay. One is, well, since I'm looking at you and I can't actually perfectly tell why you have depression in your brain just by looking at your head, if I can do a special type of brain map that looks at the activity to see where misfiring is occurring, because depression can be partly the anterior cingulate. Depression might be related to this left frontal quadrant that I just talked about. It may be related to the left temporal lobe. There may be a right temporal parietal, in other words, there's different parts of the brain that might be contributing to what you call depression. Also, yes, I would want to know, well, what do you mean by depression? Somebody says they're depressed. Is this, I don't feel like doing anything. I'm not motivated. I can't get myself to go do anything. Life is blah and I have no joy and I can't. Okay, is that depression or is that low brain energy? Low brain energy might have a different assessment than, oh, woe is me, life is terrible, and I'm really, really deeply depressed. So there's a lot of assessment, and you need to know, what am I really training? Not so different than you go into the gym and my shoulder hurts. Is my shoulder hurt why is it hurting? What do I need to do? I really need to train the shoulder? Is this really how you stand? Is this really a hip problem that's radiating to your shoulder? You understand that. And this is 1,000 times more complicated or 1,000,000 times more complicated than, okay, why your shoulder hurt. So we do need to understand what we're trying to train. So apologize for that long answer.
No, it's an important thing to say that highly personalized to the individual is a very important matter to state.
But let's say I've done this for years and gee, I've talked to you and I think gee, you're too stuck in your head. Your energy is a little low. You can't quite get out of yourself. So you're too internally, ruminating about stuff that's going on and woe is me and things like that. So I'm either going to choose left frontal quadrant. I'm way oversimplifying, by the way, but the left frontal quadrant of training the left frontal quadrant of your head is how do we engage in the world? So there's a neuropsychologist many years ago who said, this is the part of the brain that lets you get out of yourself and actually engage in the world. So if we thought that would be the benefit, then I would put a sensor or more than one sensor over this part of the head. I would so that we're using neurofeedback equipment. So what that means is we're putting sensors on your head that's connected to a computer. We're going to have you watch a movie and we'll let you pick the movie or Netflix or something like that. And you're going to be seeing something that fades in and out, gets smaller or bigger, or fades in and out. And every time your brain is more in a state of more up, alert, awake, and outside of your your internal locus, meaning I'm too stuck in my head. So I need to be more engaged in the world.
Yeah.
With a little more energy. So I'm going to activate this left frontal quadrant, which helps you more engage outside yourself and with the world by giving you feedback every time you're making more of that activity.
So there is a stimulation there. You're going to be stimulating that part of my brain?
You are stimulating your own brain.
Interesting. Okay. So there's no external stimulation here.
No. Now, if you wanted to get external stimulation equipment and stimulate that part of the brain, you could have probably achieved the same thing. But the neurofeedback helps you learn to stimulate that part of your brain. So you get better at it over time rather than I have to stimulate that part of my brain every day or something like that. And what people this concept of neurofeedback is so challenging. I'm going to give you a very simplistic way that I explain it. So hopefully people will get this concept. And by the way, I appreciate that you're actually asking the exact stuff that people ask me every day. How does this work? I don't understand this at all. Okay. And yet, how much do you understand about how your brain is even paying attention right now? How are you paying attention? How are you making your brain pay attention right now? You have no idea. Your brain is automatically doing that for you, correct? So we don't think about how our brain performs, but we also don't understand we can improve that. So let's say we put the sensor here. I'm going to talk about bicycle. You know how to ride a bike, right?
I do.
So if you're riding a bike down the road and you're on a nice road, you're looking around, you have no energy or awareness of how you are riding the bike, correct? Because you're watching everything around. So how are you riding that bike and how are you keeping that up? Your brain is constantly aware of everything that's going on and it is managing how you are staying up, but you are unaware of it. Just like you're unaware of why you're breathing at the moment. But so now you're riding down the road and you hit a rock that you didn't see and your bike starts to tip. So you're tipping a little bit and you don't fall, you end up staying upright. How did you do that? So you got feedback. And the feedback was, my pattern has been disrupted. And how did you figure out how not to fall? You didn't figure it out. Your brain automatically rebalanced you. And if you had to think, oh, I need to stay up, you'd be down. Your brain instantly got feedback and changed. So think of, I'm putting sensor on your left quadrant. You're watching this movie, and the moment the movie fades out, just like The Rock, it's like, oh, I'm off. I need to improve this. I need to rebalance this pattern. So your brain is getting feedback like it does throughout the world, like it does when you're playing a video game, and it instantly figures out how to readjust and get that movie going again. It's not a conscious process any more than when you hit that rock. It was not a conscious process how you didn't fall. You just didn't understand. Your brain just rebalanced. So we are giving your brain instant feedback, and it is constantly, every time that you get, if you're playing a Pac-Man game and the Pac-Man stops. Oh, and your brain figures out how to rebalance, but it's not conscious.
Right. Well explained. You're a great communicator of this stuff. Clearly you've been talking about neurofeedback for quite a while. I'm curious how much variance there is between people's brain maps. Like you said, left quadrant. Is it highly predictable that people's attentional circuits are located in that left quadrant of the frontal lobe, or is there a lot more variance in people? Is there some people where those attentional circuits might be in the right hemisphere, might be more distributed over the two?
So there are multiple circuits that play a role in attention. So I would say, let me reframe your question a little bit. So yes, there is great similarity in the circuits for attention. For math, I looked up several years ago, there's something called Brodmann areas in the brain. These are 52 different areas in the brain that are associated with different functions in those parts of the brain. And so I looked up, if you go to PubMed, you can do this, which is the NIH database, math and Brodmann areas. So at the time, there were 9 different areas of the brain that play a role in how your brain does math. So it's not like there's always one thing. If you looked up attentional systems, we think of attention as, gee, my ability to stay focused is prefrontal. Actually, that's only partially true. Your ability to stay on task is highly related to how well your parietal lobe, the back of your head, stays engaged and how much energy it has. So the variability is more, gee, the combination of activity. If this area of the brain has a little too little, if this area of the brain has too much alpha, it will create problems. If this part of the brain has too little alpha, it will create problems. If this alpha is neurons firing 8 to 12 times per second. If it has too much faster activity, which is beta, that will create problems. If it doesn't have enough, it will create problems. And then this has to talk to this. This has to talk to this. This has to talk to this. So it's this complex dynamic system. And so when we do brain maps, what we see is that everybody has not everybody, but you have these slight differentials in not just an area, but how different areas communicate and the timing. In other words, gee, this is going a little too fast and this is going a little too slow, and that creates a problem. So we literally are looking at clues. Essentially what a brain map does is gives you clues. Think of this as a battery. It's electrical. I got a little bit of hot spot there. I got a little bit of low spot here. I got a little bit of excess going on. All the rest is actually doing pretty good. But gee, there's an energy imbalance a little bit across my brain that's affecting my performance. And the timing, if you want to use a timing example, you got an orchestra and you've got a conductor up in front of the orchestra, and the violins come in like a quarter of a second before the percussion. The percussion comes in a quarter of a second before the wind instruments. Gee, if they all come in at the same time, you get a much better sounding orchestra. But if the timing of different areas of the brain are a little off, if you got hit in the head with a baseball or a soccer ball years ago and timing gets off, there are many different reasons, by the way, timing can get off in the brain. There are many different reasons why there can be imbalances in energy across the brain or the electrical activity. And I could, talk about toxicity. I could talk about getting whacked in the head, how you eat, do you use phone too much near your head? And there's many different things, but all of these things you asked about, is this, for example, the attentional circuit? There's so many different complexities in how your brain manages attention. And if any of these things are off, you are less efficient. So rather than focus on, let's define all the problem to the nth degree, let's find a basic brain map, or let's identify areas of the brain that might be contributing to a problem, and let's train the heck out of it and see if you can do better. And so
Right.
fundamentally, neurofeedback, how do you end up judging all this discussion is train your brain and do you do better? And what people notice is they do better Do they always do better in 2 to 5 minutes? No.
Let's get into, I'd love to, that was well explained, and I think that solved a lot of misunderstanding that I had. I'm curious on going to like the experimental evidence. Like, what do the best experiments really say in terms of the efficacy of neurofeedback training plus combination talk therapy, if that is compared to just normal standard cognitive behavioral therapy, but there isn't a neurofeedback element?
Several years ago, there's a PhD psychologist from Australia who did a compilation of research studies in the realm of neurofeedback. He identified out of, I think it was 500, maybe 275 that actually were rigorously done and that were met good standards. So there were about 275 studies. The challenge of explaining what you're asking is, in terms of studies, people are often going, okay, show me the results for autism, show me the results for ADHD, show me the results for depression, show me the results for anxiety of doing neurofeedback, and then compare it to other things. There are studies in all of these. One could say there's not compared to drugs, there might not be as many, and they'll always say, well, there's not enough studies. So let's give you the first example. The first studies were done with seizures. So I'm going to pick this one because arguably seizures, which is basically, in overly simplistic terms, an electrical storm in your brain. Everybody, all the different circuits in your brain are supposed to operate kind of independently, but if they all start just firing at the same time, that can produce a seizure-like event. And there are more than 21 published studies in medical journals that show when you do neurofeedback with people who have long-standing seizures, the number of seizures are reduced and the often significantly. So the intensity and the number are often reduced. So those are published in medical journals. I'm giving this example because in terms of brain dysregulation, all the things that we fundamentally are talking about training really is, if my brain is more organized and functioning better, meaning less dysregulated, I perform better. Seizures could be one of the most dysregulated functions in the brain. Your brain is just not firing well. The timing is off. There's a lack of control circuits that are playing a role in suppressing things that shouldn't be happening. And yet we saw this huge amount of research, published studies that show neurofeedback works with that. Gee, do you think of it? And how did ADHD come about? Because some of the seizure studies, people had ADHD in addition to seizures. And they started noticing that the ADHD improved, not just the seizures. And so then there were a number of other studies published on the effects of neurofeedback and ADHD. So let's just start with the challenge, which is, okay, if there are published studies on neurofeedback for seizures, how many neurologists who work with seizures use it? 0.001% at best. I mean, most neurologists don't, because it's not studies that actually cause things to get accepted. That's just not how the medical system works. It is some big company that takes a study which has minimal effects, but some effects, and funds educating all the doctors. Well, you just publish a study in a journal, nobody sees it. So the University of California, Davis has done several studies on autism and neurofeedback. How many people in the world that treat autism are saying, gee, here's this study that has this incredibly promising work with showing improvements with autistic kids. How many people are doing neurofeedback and autism? Tiny, because there's no company that makes money from the technology.
There isn't a big neurofeedback industry that funds all of the industries down below with huge, infinitely deep pockets.
It's non-proprietary technology. So if you get approved for autism, or you get approved for depression, or you get approved for anxiety, since nobody owns patents on this stuff because the technology has been around a while, then anybody can jump in and start doing it, and you'll lose money because you spent millions to get it FDA approved.
That perspective makes sense to me in terms of why it doesn't have a very large, widespread adoption. But you would think that if it really was as effective as you're laying out here, that it would have more adoption than it does. Do you think there are other factors at play here?
Yes. I mean, you might think that, but I mean, acupuncture took forever and ever and ever and ever to gain acceptance, and it barely has insurance coverage. So, one, reimbursement matters. So, a lot of doctors who even know about neurofeedback will say, well, I'm not going to mention it to clients even as an option because it's not covered. It might not be covered by insurance.
Right.
But the bigger obstacles are how long you've studied some about neurofeedback. This is not brand new to you. And yet you have a different perspective on neurofeedback now that I've explained some than you did 2 hours ago. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely.
Most doctors and psychologists don't understand neurofeedback because they haven't taken the time to get it. It's hard to imagine how it works. Gee, I can put a sensor here and all of a sudden take a depressed person and have them feel better in 5 minutes. That is not a concept that people have. By the way, that doesn't always work that quickly. So, but I've seen it multiple times. This is not like magic. It's what happens when somebody activates that circuit. And so the learning curve for health professionals, why would a health professional tell you about something that they don't understand? If they don't understand it, they're going to say, well, I really don't know much about it. So they're not going to recommend it. That's starting to change a tiny bit. There is no, okay, when you think about what professionals does neurofeedback impact? Psychiatry, psychologists, licensed mental health therapists, physical therapists, by the way. There's a lot of neurological issues, neurologists, educational specialists. How many special ed kids? How many processing issues? Is processing, I don't learn as well as I should because I struggle in school, I struggle in work. Are processing issues a brain problem? Absolutely. What is neurofeedback? It is a way to increase the efficiency of your brain so that your brain performs better. So if I have memory issues, I have comprehension issues, I have a hard time even expressing what I'm going to say because I struggle to get the words out well, or I'm not quite as quick at it as I should be. I struggle to get the words out. Where is that in the brain, and can you train that? The answer is always you can improve the brain. But speech therapists, occupational. So I'm telling you all the different disciplines that actually do use neurofeedback, but no discipline owns it. No universities. Which discipline in a university is going to say, I'm going to get my graduate students to start to research this? Because that's, by the way, how it would get more accepted in schools. But they can't find professors who will sponsor them because the professors don't know the technology. So there's this too many disciplines, but nobody owns it.
Right.
Which is actually, it's a hard concept to get, and I apologize for getting into that, but it actually blocks the acceptance professionally of this tool.
What about in private sectors like professional sports? You always hear, I hear stuff about golfers using this and like footballers using this. Like that's an area where if it made a difference, there's enough private money in the huge football teams and the huge golf companies to fund that, right? What do you know about that side?
So several years ago, the Italian soccer team actually won, I believe won the World Cup that year, but I'm not remembering exactly what was won, but they attributed some of their performance improvements to actually doing neurofeedback. I've seen golfers do it. I've seen, there's been some online football players who talked about it, but and even at our conference, there was a baseball player who attributed it to, after an injury, coming back in and getting back into the World Series. His name was Casey Means at the time. I worked with a athlete who was a hitter and was unable, had to drop out of baseball. And after we and one other, we were jointly working on him with neurofeedback and something else, more of an MD. They called him back up and he played in the World Series. And he had been out of baseball for 9 months because he'd gotten off, partly from an injury. So there are many individual examples, but sports are very competitive. So there are sports psychologists who do this, but many people who have their secrets as to how they perform better, they're not actually out there trying to share with the world, here's how you can be more competitive and better. And, what's the difference? Let's take golf. What's the difference between the top golfers and the next to top golfers? It's mostly in the head. These people have incredible skills. So
With tennis as well, I would definitely argue with tennis as well. The thing that separated them is all mentality.
It's the head. So
Yeah.
why would they not all be doing this? But most sports psychologists don't do it. So they're not going to introduce it unless they're comfortable. So there are few who've adopted it. But I'll give you an example. We're in South Florida and we're near PGA National, and there's some golfers that on occasion I get. And I had a guy who came, there's the PGA, and then there's like these lower level tiers where they're trying to get onto the major circuits. So he was trying to get on the major circuits. And when he came, he was probably 23. And he's like, I have an incredible game. I just had the skills, but my head gets in my way. And can this help? We did 2 sessions on him. And it was very clear that he did not realize how he ramped up. He got over engaged. So if you think about golf, you got to be really calm when you're going to hit a shot. And if something happens and you hit a bad shot, can you get that out of your head? So, there's all different nuances of this. But nonetheless, we put sensors on him. I didn't do a brain map. I just kind of showed him how his nervous system was overly ramping. And he got it really quick. Athletes get stuff quickly. And
is he on a golf course here? Is he on the first tee of a golf course? No, he's in the lab or in your...
He's in my office. I'm having him engage in watching something that was a little bit activating, whether he was watching a movie. And I said, see that number that is supposed to be your high beta. In other words, for you to be calm, that number should be like 8 and yours is like 18. And so he had to learn to practice getting that calm. He had never noticed that about himself ever. We did 2 sessions. He calls me. He'd never won a tournament. He texts me actually from Brazil. He says, I just won my first tournament. That was after 2 sessions of neurofeedback. But I didn't really train him a lot. I think I helped him recognize what he was doing wrong, and he learned it quickly. So I don't want to attribute all of that to neurofeedback. The neurofeedback helped him see, oh my God, I had no idea I was doing this. Whereas some people, if you get anxious when you're around certain people or they set you off, it might take you longer to learn how to teach your brain not how to over-respond.
I'm surprised it didn't involve getting him on the golf course. Like if his problem is putting, when he birdie putting from 10 yards, I'm surprised that you didn't put him in that scenario, see what circuits in his brain were dysregulated in that moment, and then say, right, here's your issue, here's how you correct it. You could just do that arousal, almost imitating that scenario by just making him watch a movie of some sort.
There are sports psychologists who have some portable units who have done that. There was actually a study published on golfers about training them and showing that there was improvements in getting closer to the cup or improved putting. And I can't remember which of those, I apologize, but it was a study out of Arizona with golfers. So there's all kinds of ways to do it, but let's think about you're in a podcast situation. You have to be incredibly present. You have to some degree, be paying complete attention to what I'm saying, but then quickly shift to, okay, let's reflect on that. And what's the next question? And if you get off even a tiny bit, you're going to be less good at asking a question. So if I were to train you without being in a podcast situation, can I teach your brain to practice being more present and more calm? Because when you're more present and calm, arguably you listen much better, and then you're able to flexibly adapt to whatever is coming at you. So you're training flexibility, adaptability, and being present. That doesn't have to be done while you're in podcast mode. Same
Makes a
is
lot of
true
sense.
for golf or tennis.
Do you have any standout cases that have really stuck with you in the decades of someone coming to you with just this either crippling problem or really important in their life, and then through a certain amount of neurofeedback sessions, it's just kind of radically transformed their life?
All right. So I'm going to mention something, and I hope you don't mind. I'm just going to put this up here for a second.
Yes.
This is a book. Oh, it's mirrored.
I can put it on screen. I'll put your book on screen.
All right, you'll put it on screen. That's perfect. So there's a new book that I'm putting out called The Mind Rewired, 25 Stories of Healing Trauma, Anxiety, and Beyond with Neurofeedback. And the purpose of that book is to answer what you just said, which is give really good stories of how people's lives have been transformed. Half of the stories are from my center. I also recruited 11 or actually 12 other clinicians. They have identified people, and we interviewed those people to identify their stories, and the clinicians actually commented on those stories. So it's from people all over the country, psychologists, therapists, MDs, who have seen the kind of changes that change people's lives. So that can be people with crippling trauma. I'm going to give a concussion example because I just saw her the other day. So I have so many stories, it's too many, but this woman, very attractive, probably 38, 39 now, had a couple of concussions earlier, some years ago. And when she came to us, she was having problems driving because the visual of driving threw her off. She liked to play tennis. That was hard for her because the ball coming at her was hard for her to adjust. And in terms of her performance at work, she had a good job, but she struggled to keep up. She often had to listen on meetings and keep up with what's going on. So she had to work really, really hard to maintain her job. And she had heard about, this helps concussion. All right, what does concussion do? It causes problems with your ability to concentrate. It can cause problems with how you process visual information. It can cause problems in how you comprehend certain things or how quickly you comprehend things. So we did do a brain map on her. We started training, and she, within a few sessions, started reporting that things at work were getting a little bit better. So gradually over time, she has reported to me, one, now she's driving with no problem. Her tennis has improved immensely because she can now manage the timing of her vision is working much, much better. But probably more importantly, her performance has gone through the roof. And now she's getting stuff. She's staying on top of things. She's able to anticipate what's going on. She's able to rather than just take it and process it later, she is in the moment being able to handle things, which actually improves your performance standing in a work environment. She has a really good job. And so her life has really been transformed. She's not in the book, by the way, but her life is I just saw her, and her life is transformed. And she just says, I tell everybody I know about this because it's so impactful. And she actually referred someone else to us who has arguably who's in her 30s, arguably a horrific childhood trauma situation. Very complex, difficult. I mean, if I told you, people would be a little shocked at some of the kind of stories that she went through with abuse and abandonment and things like that, that were just difficult. She's very high performing nurse, but she came in very protective and rigid, and she gets triggered really easily. Things set her off emotionally because people who have experienced trauma in their life often are more easily triggered as they get later in life, or even, at a younger age. So she really overreacts to certain situations, which cause her challenges, particularly in her personal life, but sometimes at work. And she just has to hold it in and tough it out. We're probably 15 sessions in. That's a complex history. It's hard. Her life has already transformed. Her husband's coming to see us too. She was recommended by this concussion person. And she's so much easier. She's not reactive. She's handling situations so much better, according to her husband. I asked her, she says, I'm not sure. I might be doing a little better. And her husband's like, my God, it's night and day difference in terms of how she's reacting and responding and dealing with, complex family dynamics. Let's put it in those terms. We all have, at times, complex family dynamics, but those were crippling to her and to the situation she and her husband were in. And it's just smoothed out amazingly. And I could give stories of autistic children who, were completely disrupting their family situation. Actually, ADHD, the same thing. Just their whole family revolved around having to deal with these kids. And, after training, look, how long does it take to learn to do a complex dance? Some people can learn the complex dance in a month, and some people can take a year. It's how does your brain learn better timing and better performance? You practice. And so some take longer than others. But with these kids, I'm talking about kids who disrupt families. Often 10, 15, 20 sessions, the family's like, oh my gosh, things are so much more calm, less reactive. Sometimes it can take longer. Sometimes it can take less long. But what did neurofeedback do? Let's just pause and remind ourselves. It didn't change your brain. It literally helped you improve. Anyone from a 3-year-old to a 90-year-old can learn to dance, can learn a step, can learn to make timing work. We're just helping people learn better timing in their brain. And when we do that in the right area of your brain, you perform better. You manage your emotions better. You are more calm. And that's true so 4 and 5-year-olds, you see huge changes. And, I get plenty of people who are working who their performance is disrupted by their anxiety. Poor sleep is, so many people have poor sleep, or they wake up and they feel tired. If you wake up and you feel tired, you got a sleep problem. And many people go, no, I slept okay, but I'm tired all day. No, you got a sleep problem. And so how do you improve that? Okay, there's lots of drugs, but brain timing makes a huge difference. So many people, we just had a woman that was sleeping for a number, like 2 years, 3 to 4 hours a night consistent. That's what her sleep was. She's now sleeping 5 to 6 hours. She considers that really a huge differential. Now, I'd like to see her at 7. And so we're going to keep working with her. And it wasn't just neurofeedback. If you eat like crap, you won't do as well. If you don't exercise, you won't do as well, because you want things that are helping your brain. But if you're doing some of these healthier things, the neurofeedback training will actually often work better.
Makes sense. Is there evidence that these benefits are sustained through time? So someone comes in and does 10 sessions with you, maybe they actually do rewire their brain in some way, the circuit dynamics changes, there is something meaningfully different in those 10 weeks. Does that regress back to the norm over the next 6 months? Is there evidence that any sort of changes are sustained? Talk about like longitudinally what the evidence says.
So there was a great ADHD study done, I think 2003, 4, something like that, in which they had kids on Ritalin and then kids not on Ritalin doing neurofeedback. And I could, if you want, I could get you the research study and give you a citing for that if you email
Yeah,
us.
I'll leave the link in the description. That'd be great. Yeah.
Um, and essentially, I'm going to give you the simplistic version. They trained both, but they did some with neurofeedback and some without. Actually, reminding me, all of them were on Ritalin. So everybody was on Ritalin, but some were doing neurofeedback. Half the group was doing neurofeedback and half was not. And so they had done a baseline score of what were they like before they were on Ritalin doing cognitive, attentional tests. And then they did like 40 sessions of neurofeedback. On one group, they did 40 sessions without neurofeedback, but with other kinds of training for the other group. And then they took them both off the Ritalin and retested. In other words, I'm going to do this cognitive test now that you've done 40 sessions of neurofeedback, but yes, you were on Ritalin. This other group was not on Ritalin. Let's see what happens. And what happened was the group that had done neurofeedback with Ritalin maintained 80% of the gains when they came off Ritalin. In other words, they did much better and they maintained most of the results that would have been, okay, was that from Ritalin? They actually maintained most of the benefits. The group that didn't do neurofeedback, that had Ritalin and other kinds of training, went back to baseline. Their brain had not learned to manage attention better. So the group that did neurofeedback their brains learned how to manage attention better, even though they were on Ritalin. So that's an interesting study. So let me just give you from a clinical perspective rather than research, because it would be hard for me to go through all the research studies. I mean, the seizure patients had shown a reduction of seizures, and that often maintained. In other words, after their brain learned to stop seizures. Now that's an extreme case. Most people don't have that, but it's an example of just how powerful this is. So I'd rather I'm going to teach you how to play this particular piece on the piano. So we're going to learn how to play this, with both hands. I'm going to learn this piece. And the first time I get it right, like I get everything right, I played it perfect. Okay, I'm done. I'm stopped. Okay, 10 years from now, you try to play that piece, you will not do well. But if you keep practicing until you can do it in your sleep, so in other words, if you overtrain till you got it so well that you don't forget it, and 10 years from now, maybe you can still play it, maybe not so good, you're a little rusty, but you'll remember how to play the piano, if that example makes sense to you. If you overtrain, meaning if you train enough, it sticks, because it's not, am I just changing my brain? I'm learning a better pattern, right? That's what I'm training. I'm training a part of my brain to do better, just like I'm learning math. Okay, at some point, I remember that math. I remember the multiplication tables. I don't have to go, I forgot them. So if you really get it right, it works. What you'll see if you go online and people say, oh, this didn't work and it failed, because you can find those things. I'm sure you've seen that. Did you train enough? So number one, did you train long enough? Many people don't. Now, I will tell you that I talk to people who work in gyms and they go, people quit after way too few sessions and they're not in shape. I mean, when you play the piano, you might quit your lessons long before you really get good at it. So your brain has to get good at it, and that might take more sessions than people expect. That's one of the biggest challenges. The other is, if you train and you have no idea what you're training, or you are with somebody maybe who's quite as experienced at dealing with the kind of problems that you're dealing with, what's the best way to train? How do we adapt the training so that we are sure you're making progress? In other words, you go to the gym, you better have a good coach to get the maximum out of that training. The same would be good for math. The same would be true for piano. A better coach can often help you learn better. So if you have somebody who's knowledgeable and who can fit your learning style, in other words, I'm going to adapt the training. Not everybody trains the same way. I tell you that you can train this part of your brain to get you out of your head. I had a guy who said, I need to get out of my head. I need to have more stuff done. And we talked about it. And he says, this is the part of the brain I think I need to train, because I was explaining the brain to him. It did not work. But it turned out that when we trained this area of his brain that helped him be more calm, he performed incredibly well. We had to adapt the training. It turns out he was getting in his own way and he was amping himself up too much. And so he thought he wasn't paying attention, but in fact, he was so edgy that when we brought down the edginess, he performed incredibly well.
Right.
So you better have a good coach to do that. Or if I just keep training the thing that he tells me, he would not succeed. So there are lots of examples of people failing with neurofeedback, plenty. But what does neurofeedback do? You're exercising. I gave you the example of riding a bike and hitting the bump and you recovering without falling. You're literally learning to help your brain adapt. The machine does not do that. You're teaching your brain a more functional pattern. And so if you train today and you don't sleep as well tonight, is that possible? So you've exercised certain neurons firing at a certain rate, and you don't sleep as well tonight, and you don't sleep as well tomorrow night. So is that a side effect of neurofeedback? Well, if you go to the gym, could you be sore?
Of course.
And so if you're sore and you don't like that, you go, well, I never want to do that exercise again because that made me feel not good. Actually, that's not what that means. That means we need to adjust the exercise, or you need to actually work that and work through it till you function better. But a lot of people don't quite get that concept with the brain.
Yeah. You brought up a good point there, that you need a good coach. So I think maybe to wrap up this conversation, which has been great, and you're a really good communicator. If someone doesn't have a spare Michael Cohen lying around, they don't have access to you that they can pull at for these therapy sessions or whatever sessions, is there anything someone can do at home? Are there any good devices out there that you recommend where someone can start making improvement on this by themselves, because they've been convinced by what you've said today?
So it's a very challenging question in the sense that if what you need is just a little peak performance training, can you find a device that there are a number of devices out there that if you look up neurofeedback for use at home, for example, that might be a search term. There are people out there who offer systems that help do that. What you want is to make sure that they have somebody who can help guide you, not just get the equipment. Could you look up, what different areas of my brain do, and then on your own say, okay, I'm going to train, like we talked about, left quadrant. I'm going to train that area of my brain. You could do that. If you don't have a big problem, maybe you can play with it and practice seeing which type of training helps you the most. If you can find the coach online, like we offer some support for people at home, I'm not in any way suggesting they need to come to us. There are many other people offering these kind of tools. So if you have a more complex problem, like you haven't slept well for 5 years, you have significant ADD, you have seizures. I was a guy who says, I was trying to train myself for seizures at home. I'm like, without any coaching?
It's optimistic. It's very optimistic.
Depression, anxiety, any of these things, it would be better if you could find a coach. So I don't have a perfect answer as to say who there, other than without, like, I don't want to be so specific. I would just say, if we can be of help, fine. But there are lots of resources online. I think what's going to happen, however, this is a prediction, is over the next 1 to 2 years, AI is going to have a more significant effect on this.
Interesting.
Meaning, I have no idea what I'm doing, but can I ask, given this list of symptoms, even without an EEG, can that help identify what areas of the brain I might put a sensor on and train? Is it perfectly there yet now? Not really, based on at least what I'm getting, but I think within a year or 2 years, I think it's going to be a game changer for our field, because it's going to at least help people understand more. The challenge of doing it on your own and not having a coach is it's really hard to understand sometimes the changes that happen. They can be very subtle. Like, you have an attention problem. You know, how are you going to notice if you're going in the right direction? Can you easily do that on your own? Or is it better if you have either some objective measure or you have other people who are kind of watching you? I get people all the time who come in and say, no, I really haven't had any change. I'm like, well, how is your, are you reacting less to people? Yeah, I actually am reacting less to people. But if you thought you weren't making any progress, which is what they told me, you might say, oh, I need to change the training. So having an outside observer, whether that's a professional or an outside observer who really can tell you what's going on, is important. When I train with neurofeedback, I am very insensitive to the effects on me, meaning I don't notice what happens in any session or two.
Yes.
But my wife might go, when's the last time you trained? You need to go train because you're a lot nicer, or you're a little more patient when you train. So you need to go do that. But I thought I was fine.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. Michael, this has been so much fun. I think you're a really good communicator on this stuff. I'm really excited to see, you mentioned AI at the end, how AI will impact this. Will the future be that we all have our EEG devices that we wear throughout the day, and then it uploads automatically to ChatGPT or neurofeedback.ai, whatever it is, and it's saying, at 2 p.m. your brain signature told us this, at 5 p.m. it told us this. Like, hypothetically, that's very possible, right? You just upload all the data. It has a really big data set that it's pulling on, and it knows what EEG signals generally relates to what. It learns with your signatures over time. It gets better at learning what your specific alpha bands in the thalamus or in the thalamocortical circuits. Like, it starts reading all these things and figuring out, and then it just gets really good at knowing your brain. Do you kind of see that as the future of the field?
And maybe it's 2 to 3 years, and maybe I'm off base, but yes, I do think it's the future. And look, if you can get a brain map, if you can get, like, there are actually some more portable systems that you can put the thing on and record your EEG. So that's beginning to be out there, where you can actually capture your whole EEG, upload that, and then it says, based on the dynamics of your brain, here are some spots that you need to balance. Not necessarily what your brain is like at 5 o'clock in the day. It's what is the steady state capacity of this electrical system in your brain. But nonetheless, do I think it is the future? I guess I do.
Very cool. Michael, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. That was such a fun conversation.
Thank you so much. You're a great interviewer. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael.
I don't think we make minds. I don't think we create consciousness. I don't think we do it when we make an embryo. I don't think we do it when we make an AI or an embedded robotic system. We facilitate the ingression of certain patterns from that Platonic space, and this is where we get to a completely, sort of different theory of consciousness. For the exact same reasons you attribute consciousness to some other beings, you should be very serious about attributing it to other organs and tissues of your body for the exact same reasons. I think all living material, and probably lots of non-living material, has some kind of experience, but being able to say what that is requires a lot of work that hasn't been done yet.